In your struggle against sin, you have not yet resisted to the point of shedding your blood. And have you completely forgotten this word of encouragement that addresses you as a father addresses his son? It says, "My son, do not make light of the Lord's discipline, and do not lose heart when he rebukes you, because the Lord disciplines the one he loves, and he chastens everyone he accepts as his son." Endure hardship as discipline. God is treating you as his children. For what children are not disciplined by their father? If you are not disciplined, and everyone undergoes discipline, then you are not legitimate, not true sons and daughters at all. Moreover, we have all had human fathers who disciplined us, and we respected them for it. How much more should we submit to the Father of spirits and live? They disciplined us for a little while as they thought best, but God disciplines us for our good, in order that we may share in his holiness. No discipline seems pleasant at the time, but painful. Later on, however, it produces a harvest of righteousness and peace for those who have been trained by it. Therefore, strengthen your feeble arms and weak knees. Make level paths for your feet, so that the lame may not be disabled, but rather healed. Make every effort to live in peace with everyone and to be holy. Without holiness, no one will see the Lord. See to it that no one falls short of the grace of God, and that no bitter root grows up to cause trouble and defile many. See that no one is sexually immoral or is godless like Esau, who for a single meal sold his inheritance rights as the oldest son. Afterward, as you know, when he wanted to inherit this blessing, he was rejected. Even though he sought the blessing with tears, he could not change what he had done. This is the word of the Lord.
Good morning. If we haven't met, my name is Tyler. I'm the church planning resident here, and it's a joy to be able to share with you this morning. We've been in a series on Hebrews, so we will continue that. To set the stage, though, in the summer of 2015, a guy named Mike Schur, are we familiar with Mike Schur at all? He's a television producer, writer. A couple of our TV folks are in there. He'd already flourished as a television writer, producer, director, and co-creator. He started out on SNL, writing for a few years, and producing Weekend Update for Tina Fey and Jimmy Fallon. Then Schur went on to write for and produce The Office, the first 4 seasons, probably the best of the American version. He also had a key reoccurring role as Dwight's cousin Mose. From there, he was tapped to co-create and be the showrunner for Parks and Rec. And then this led to him co-creating and executive producing Brooklyn Nine-Nine. Now, as Parks and Rec was concluding, the studio execs of NBC approached Schur to create a new family sitcom. And they essentially gave him a green light on a blind script commitment. He spent the next few months heavily researching and developing the plot for his upcoming formal pitch meeting. A woman named Eleanor Shellstrop dies and realizes she has accidentally been sent to the good place due to a case of mistaken identity. To avoid being sent to the bad place, she must hide her deeply flawed past. She convinces her designated soulmate, a moral philosophy professor, to secretly tutor her in ethics so she can earn her spot and learn how to be a truly good person. While a novel concept for a pitch, this was a bit far from Full House or Family Matters or any other family sitcom that NBC was searching for. And if you're familiar with the show, which you should be, are we familiar with The Good Place at all? One of the best shows of the 21st century, I think. Schur didn't even reveal the major twist at the end of season 1 in the pitch. He kept that secret for a while to the execs. But still, with Schur's creative reputation in mind, NBC trusted him, and they greenlit The Good Place, not knowing where this was going. As an early viewer of the show, my wife and I, we were a little uncertain too whether the show would make it or not. If you jump into that first ep, it's a little weird. It's different. It's an odd sitcom to start off in. But throughout the show's 4-season run, there were definitely points when we asked, what in the world are they doing with this character, this plot? Where are they going with this? But throughout the show's run, revelations and resolutions unfolded that made it one of the more brilliant shows on television, in my opinion, and according to critics. Take that as you will. But despite our regularly reoccurring doubts and apprehensions of the show, knowing it was a Mike Schur show and that it starred TV icon Ted Danson, whose IMDb is probably second to Julia Louis-Dreyfus, our trust in the creative team kept us engaged and enjoying until the end. In our passage today, the author of Hebrews is asking a tired, persecuted church to trust the ultimate director. Even when the plot of their lives feels painful, confusing, overwhelming, we're focusing on a section in Hebrews that one of our commentators we're referencing a lot this series, Amy Peeler, writes in her commentary that this passage is, quote, a very hard text, and one that, quote, certainly has been misused. So to that, I want to say thank you to Caleb for the assignment, and let's see what happens. I also note we don't have a clock in the back. Okay, so I get to go as long as I want. Ultimately, the writer of Hebrews articulates a call to faithfulness for those who follow Jesus, a call that comes with a cost, so great that it ought to be struggled toward and endured in community. So let's look at the call. Beginning in verse 4. In your struggle against sin, you have not yet resisted to the point of shedding blood. Now, from elsewhere in the text, earlier in chapter 10 and then in a few weeks in chapter 13, we can infer that some of these members of their community have been shamed, they've had property taken from them, and some have even been imprisoned. They're weary, they're fatigued, but they're still alive. One commentator notes, in this remark, the author braces the addressees for what their imitation of Christ's endurance might ultimately involve. Now, just in last week's passage, only sentences prior to this, the author highlighted the literal shed blood of Jesus, whom they are to follow after, to imitate. For those who choose to be disciples of Jesus, the call may be the same, is what this author is saying, to the point of martyrdom. The call is to be faithful to Jesus no matter the cost. Now jump down to verse 12. The author continues, therefore, lift your drooping hands, strengthen your weak knees, make straight paths for your feet, so that what is lame may not be put out of joint, but rather be healed. Pursue peace with everyone. Now, these drooping hands, these weak knees, they're continuing that illusion, that illustration that began last week, this race that we are running. As the exhaustion of race, of the match, of the game is setting in their form, and their form is collapsing, the author's encouraging the Hebrews, focus your form. Fix your eyes on the track, the pitch, the court, keep going. But the pushback from the Hebrews is likely, at what cost? So let's look at the cost. In verse 5, the cost of faithfulness is laid out for us. The writer continues, and you have forgotten the exhortation that addresses you as children. The author's literally saying they've forgotten Scripture because he's about to quote, or she is about to quote Proverbs 3 to them. Exhortation meaning an urge, a push, a charge. It's not simply just encouraging them, it is pushing them in this direction. My child, do not regard lightly the discipline of the Lord, or lose heart when you are punished by him. For the Lord disciplines those whom he loves and chastises every child whom he accepts. Endure trials for the sake of discipline. God is treating you as children. For what child is there whom a parent does not discipline? If you do not have that discipline in which all children share, then you are illegitimate and not his children. Moreover, we had parents, human parents, to discipline us, and we respected them. should we not be even more willing to be subject to the Father of spirits and live? For they disciplined us for a short time as seemed best to them, but he disciplines us for our good, in order that we might share his holiness. Now, discipline always seems painful rather than pleasant at the time, but later it yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness to those who have been trained by it. When we hear the word discipline, I don't know about you, but we may react with discomfort, unease. We might be a little put off by that as 21st century Westerners, especially in the age of gentle parenting. In these handful of verses, there's some questionable verbiage that we'll hopefully address, attempt to address at least, but even more so, we've perhaps seen verses like these weaponized, utilized for mistreatment, even dehumanization of people. That's what Peeler was alluding to earlier. But in the ancient world and in our passage, discipline means education, training, formation. God's not striking it in anger, but is training for endurance. Now, as a father of three, I've had a few encounters of this, one with our older daughter when she was a teenager. There were many instances that would come up from time to time where she was struggling with something with her friend group, and we had to coach her, had to train her, and thoughtfully ask questions and help walk her and lead her through potentially what does it look like to follow Jesus in this situation? What is wise? What is good? And the pushback, the tension, the battle was always, yeah, but what about my friends? They're doing this, or they're involved in this. And I would often have to point out, my wife and I would point out, we're not their parents. We're your parents. Similarly, as a father of two younger girls, I'm at J.J. Byrne, let alone most playgrounds in New York City, pretty much every day. And parents, if you are park people, you might be familiar with this situation. Your kids are playing, they somehow find friends right away, and there's one or two that are doing something that's off, or maybe it's unwise, maybe it's even dangerous, and you're kind of left with this dilemma. How much do I step in? How much do I talk to my kids? Do I talk to this kid? They're not my kid. Do I parent them? Do I dad them? Do I only dad them when their life's on the line, when a limb is on the line, when it's just like, hey, that's not nice? At what point do I father them? And it's different with me and Rowan and Kinsey. But perhaps you've maybe been in management or are in management, and you've been faced with the dilemma of knowing one of your employees is departing from the company soon. And you're like, okay, how much more do I invest in this person? They're not here that long. Our relationship is temporary. It's not really established. Do you continue investing? Is it worth your time, or are they too far gone? Is there even an attachment anymore? It's one of the many reasons why it's weird how much attention Michael Scott gives to Ryan the temp in The Office, right? He's a temp, and he's giving him a lot of attention to the point where you're like, why is Michael so focused on this guy? The writer here distinguishes between legitimate and illegitimate children, which in the ancient Near East is a very derogatory term. In the ancient world, illegitimate children were ignored. They were left without any inheritance, an education, guidance, and even a place in society. One of my favorite shows in high school was the Southern California teen soap, The O.C. Anyone else? We've got a couple. Okay, there we go. I shouldn't say it still is. Every August I hear like Phantom Planet and hear that California song, and I'm ready to come right back where we started from. Anyways, if you don't get it, I'm sorry. It's on Hulu. The dad in the show, though, Sandy Cohen, he's a public defender, and he's also married to a wealthy Orange County real estate development family. He's married into that family. He brings home Ryan Atwood. He's apparently 15 or 16, but he definitely looks 25 at least, as all teen shows did earlier on. And he's just been kicked out and abandoned by his mother. And so Sandy doesn't just give Ryan a place to stay. Initially, it starts out that way, but eventually they invite him into their family. He treats him as a true son. Now, that means Ryan receives the privilege of the family, but it also means Sandy can hold him accountable, can correct him, can push him, can encourage him to make difficult choices, to be there when he messes up, to help him grow as a young man. And similarly, Ryan has to decide throughout the show whether to receive that active parenting or to run back to his old life. And even throughout the show, the show's 4 seasons. It seems like every good show runs 4 seasons. Even while he's established as a son, he still has periodic seasons in his life where he's wondering, he's questioning his sonship, questioning, is my father figure worth listening to, continuing on this path? Now, God doesn't leave us as spiritual orphans, but instead actively parents us. Earthly parents, we try our best. We ask other parents. We look up what Dr. Becky might say or advise. We wonder what our parents did, and then we question, do we agree with that anymore? Has that changed? Or do we still see the good in some of that? Parents tend to try their best, but we still make a ton of mistakes. I think that's one of the things that as you become a parent, you're like, oh, my parents were just going for it. They didn't know everything. Whereas as a kid, I was like, oh, mom and dad know everything. And so it's fun when Rowan's like, why do we do this? Give me a minute. I got to come up with an answer, right? A defense of my parenting. But yeah, parents tend to try their best, but still make mistakes. God's different though. God's parenting, God's judgment of us, God's discipline of us is not what seems best to him. As being all good, all knowing, God's discipline is perfect for us. God is not some FIFA World Cup ref with a bias towards a certain South American football team. Yeah, I said it. God disciplines us perfectly for our good so that we might share his holiness. So how do we make sense of God allowing his people to suffer persecution? This was the hardest part of the passage, the heavy words of chastise and punishment. What do we do with these? What do we who live in 2026 in New York City, how do we handle this part of the passage? I'm just going to toss it over to New Testament scholar Amy Peeler. She explains, by portraying God as the one who disciplines, the author places God in the midst of their difficulty. Not as its cause, the ultimate problem is sin, but as its sovereign. It's not necessarily their sin, but also, and most likely, the sin of those who are oppressing them. God is not distant, simply watching the child struggle. God is right there in the ring. He's on the playground with them, with the child, allowing and shaping the blows so that they do not destroy, but only strengthen. God's complete knowledge and trustworthiness assert that God's use of discipline will never succumb to anger or foolishness. God knows all things and is working them for the best. Just last summer, 4-year-old Rowan is learning to climb and learning to monkey bar, and she's climbing up the swing set bars right outside here, trying to get to the top with just her hands. And she gets about 2/3 up, and for the longest time, for quite a few weeks, is just shaking and like, Dad, I'm gonna fall, and just quivering in fear. And I'm right there. I'm gonna catch. Nothing's gonna happen. I'm right here, but she can't see it. She's looking up. She's trying to climb these poles. She's focused on here, but she doesn't realize I'm right under her. Nothing's going to happen. And she doesn't realize she's like this little, and, the gap is not that far. But sometimes you even let her fall a little because it's not that far. It's not as far as you think. Just so she can get her footing. She can grow in confidence. Similarly, suffering persecution isn't proof that God has abandoned you. As much as it feels that way, it must feel that way. As someone who hasn't endured much anything to this degree of pushback to my faith. But for those who do suffer pushback to whatever degree, it's not proof that God has abandoned you. Rather, it's evidence that God is right there in the ring with you, shaping your character into the peaceful fruit of righteousness. It's that coach who is investing in you. It sees what you can become, sees the potential, and invests more in your development. That's what the illustration is pointing us towards. And then the third point of faithfulness that this passage gets to is that there's a community aspect to faithfulness. There's a shared responsibility. Look at verse 14. The author writes, "Pursue peace with everyone, and the holiness without which no one will see the Lord. See to it that no one fails to obtain the grace of God, that no root of bitterness springs up and causes trouble, and through it many become defiled. See to it that no one becomes like Esau, an immoral and godless person, who sold his birthright for a single meal. You know that later, when he wanted to inherit the blessing, he was rejected, for he found no chance to repent, even though he sought the blessing with tears." And notice how the text shifts from individual to communal endurance. There's this faithfulness that we're called to is a team effort. It's a collective effort. Even in individual sports, right, or individual arts, there's a collective that helps, right? As someone who likes to write, it helps to connect and collaborate and learn from other writers. As someone who is not athletic, but some of you are, it helps, I've heard, to be involved and connect with other athletes aspiring to a similar degree of growth. So the faithfulness involves a few components as a team effort. First, the writer writes, pursue peace. Pursue it. Peace is not something that can be obtained naturally or even unintentionally. It doesn't just happen. It can't be reached by simply biting one's lip or staying quiet, as some of us might be prone to. That's why in Matthew 5:9, Jesus says, "Blessed are the peacemakers," not the peacekeepers, right? For they will be called children of God. It's not simply to keep the peace, but to do the work of making peace. This is not something that's passive. It's an aggressive pursuit. Similarly, if you've trained for anything, if you train in the gym, how I wish that my abs would show if I just sat there, right? No, I have to actively get stronger. I have to actively do the work. My writing, if I want to harness my craft, I have to actively sit my butt in the chair many times a week for hours on end and sharpen my craft. And do so with everyone, is what the author says. With the entire church community, pursue peace, rest. Shalom is the connotation here when it says peace. It's a communal gathering, or a communal harmony. The second component of faithfulness as a team effort says watch for bitterness. Verse 15 warns us against the root of bitterness, that persecution and hardship can easily make a church bitter, cynical, and defensive, and warns that bitterness may defile the entire group. If you notice the imagery I get, the person I picture, not an actual person, but just I think we have all encountered, and maybe we've all been this person at different points in our life, where anytime there's an issue, it's not looking inside. It's not what happened or maybe what I have done. The person is always playing the victim. Someone else did this to me. Esau is kind of blame shifting, even in this illustration here. And then we grow bitter. We grow annoyed. Why has this happened to me? Woe is me. And sometimes that's valid. But when it's the only lane we live in, there might be a pattern that needs to be addressed. And so they're saying, watch out for bitterness. that bitterness, that root there can lead to a cynicism within the community. And lastly, with regards to faithfulness as a team effort, the author warns guard against, quote unquote, the Esau syndrome. Verse 16 warns against becoming like Esau, who sold his birthright for a single immediate bowl of lentil soup. If we're unfamiliar with the passage, the story in Genesis, just briefly to summarize it here, Eugene Peterson, in his translation of the Bible, called this the Esau syndrome, trading away God's lifelong gift just to satisfy a short-term appetite. In that passage, Esau is the elder brother, is due the inheritance, the blessing from his father, but is tricked into trading away the blessing, and therefore his inheritance owed to him as a firstborn child for his hungry belly to be satisfied. And don't look too quickly past that illustration there. While it is likely literal, there's also much depth to that. That Esau literally forfeits his guaranteed future for one meal, for one desire, one fleeting momentary desire. If he would have waited an hour, right? I mean, our hunger goes away at a certain point. It comes and goes. He could have waited for something else or could have prepared his own meal. But in that moment, he gave in to his desires. He succumbed to them. And when persecution or cultural pressure heats up, the illustration here that the writer is using is that there's a temptation to trade away our allegiance to Jesus just to get a little immediate comfort, a little relief, perhaps social acceptance. And when reading this passage, a parable came to mind of Jesus. In Matthew's account of his life, he records Jesus telling his disciples many parables, these earthly stories with kingdom principles. And one of his parables, Jesus claimed the kingdom of heaven is like a treasure hidden in a field, which someone found and hid. Then in his joy, he goes and sells all that he has and buys that field. Jesus says the kingdom is worth selling everything for, foregoing everything. But Esau did the exact opposite. He traded the ultimate glory for instant gratification, and the Hebrews are at risk of doing the same. That's why he brings in this Esau illustration. The question for us is, are there times when we are at risk of the same? Or maybe even right now in this season of life, are there areas? Perhaps we're not experiencing, the plundering of our property or being imprisoned. Or maybe you are. I don't know everyone in this room yet. But whatever that may look like, perhaps it's social outcast or being looked over at your work because of your faith or certain ethics. Perhaps you're not invited to certain things because people think, oh, they're a Christian. They probably wouldn't want to be a part of that, or things like that. Looking at this passage, striving against sin, enduring painful discipline that God is giving, guarding the church against bitterness, it leads us to ask, how can we possibly live this out without tapping out, without giving up? The call, the cost, the community needed for faithfulness place a heavy burden on us. Our duty, our struggle, our community. But if we stop there, this sermon and this text just kind of stays as a heavy list of moral rules. We need help. And I think the reality is that Jesus flips the script. And so the final point being, we look to the faithfulness of Christ, right? His accomplishment. I understand this was last week's passage, but the reality is verses 4 through 17 are predicated upon verses 1 through 3. And so I'm going to read it for us again. The writer says, "Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and the sin that clings so closely, and let us run with perseverance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith, who for the sake of the joy that was set before him endured the cross, disregarding its shame, and has taken his seat at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured such hostility against himself from sinners, so that you may not grow weary or lose heart. Our faithfulness doesn't rest on our strength, our will, our determination. It rests on the faithfulness of Christ. When your hands are drooping, your knees are weak, look to Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of your faith. When the cost of faithfulness feels too high, consider him who endured the ultimate cost, the cross, despising the shame for the joy set before him. Jesus didn't just teach us how to run, he ran the race first. He bore the ultimate weight of sin and sat down victorious at the right hand of God. We don't strive for holiness to earn God's love. We endure because we are already his beloved children. So the question for us this morning is, where in your life are you perhaps resisting the call to faithfulness? Maybe it's not in the face of persecution, but right now, because the cost may feel too steep. Where are you tempted to compromise for a short-term taste of comfort or relief, for a bowl of lentil soup? The encouragement, the exhortation to us is lift your drooping hands, strengthen your weakened knees. Instead of focusing on your exhausted legs, fix your eyes on Christ. Find grace in the faithfulness of Christ. Trust the story God is writing of your life, even in the challenging chapters when you want to skip ahead or quit, knowing that the faithfulness of Christ has already secured your finish line. With that, I'm going to invite David up to introduce communion for us.
Thank you so much, Tyler. Would you stand with me? Tyler, well done on a challenging passage in a world that has many perspectives on the hardships we face, as well as who is to blame for the difficulties or the punishments or the disciplines that we go through. I have an invitation for us this morning. That is that what Tyler shared on was so beautiful, and landing it on this invitation to trust is really, really difficult if you've experienced a form of discipline in any area of your life from a human that had ulterior motives or methodologies that did more harm than good. It's really, really tough to step confidently into an invitation to embrace discipline. And there are so many beautiful illustrations that we can dive into regarding the human condition and how we are shaped and how hardship forms us for the future. But the underlying principle when it comes to the way that God, the Father, deals with us was mentioned in this passage. That is one, that he is good and ultimately and perfectly good, that his motives are not selfish but loving. And the invitation is to trust. And I just want to say that trust is very, very difficult when you're trusting somebody that is at a distance from you that you do not know in a very intimate way. And so there's two movements here. There's an invitation to trust, but there's also an invitation to step closer to God, to the Father, to hear his heartbeat. I have not experienced in the disciplines that I could probably identify, and they're hard to identify at times in my life, a callous, distant persona that wants to punish me for something that has happened, but rather an invitation to a better future that gets shaped through what I'm allowed to go through at times and trust God. And I want to invite you, as you come to this table, to acknowledge the representation that we participate in is that Jesus, God in the flesh, was willing to walk the hardships of earth and not just invite us into that from a distance. That he has been tempted in every way and yet was without sin. That he is able to empathize with our weaknesses, with our challenges, with even our disciplines in these ways because he understands the brokenness of this world. And that is a very heartening invitation that we can trust a Father who is good. So as you walk down the aisle today, these aisles designed to slow us down, to think, to pray, would you bring the very things that you struggle with when it comes to the idea of a Father loving through discipline, inviting to a better future? Bring those honestly before God. And then receive the very price he was willing to pay for the sake of our benefit as the affirmation that he is for our good.